All right. Excuse me. Happy to hear you all are chattery. That's good because that means maybe we'll have some good discussions today. How you guys doing? Good. Yeah. Hearing hints of senioritis here, right? Oh, congrats. Fun. It's exciting. Most of you, anyway, right? So there's a couple of you that are not graduating seniors here, so keep it in mind that you know you're not the only your situation is not the only situation here. Okay, so how many of you, despite the senioritis, at least had a chance to look through the assignment a bit? Okay, everyone, almost everyone, at least a bit. Some maybe not all the way. How many of you found it where it engaged you and you felt like you could read the whole thing, even if you didn't read the whole thing, like you were on track and it was like gripping you a little bit? Anybody?
It was kind of hard.
Hard to read? Okay.
Maybe it's just senioritis, but I thought it was pretty lengthy. I had to take a nap in between.
It was a little longer than I had remembered, to be fair.
It was like good info though. Like it wasn't bad to read.
I feel like they should have just put the big quotes as the big quotes and not like been quoting things that were like word for word in the next paragraph underneath. Like you would read the quote
And then you read it again. You're like, why am I reading this again? Yeah. So that's the awkward style sort of thing. But if you just read the green quotes only throughout the whole thing, you could have skimmed it that way, right?
I was like, why did they just like take that sentence out of
I
the
know.
paragraph and have it in the big quote?
That's kind of a pet peeve of mine when textbooks do that. And you're like, oh, this is adding something. Oh, wait, no.
So I was getting confused. I'm like, I thought I just read this. After rereading the same thing like over and over again, I get lost.
And
Yeah.
it wasn't always right next to each other, so you'd be reading it, and then you'd be like, wait, like I've heard this exact sentence before.
I thought it was helpful. It's like when you're like not paying attention and you're just reading words. You start paying attention.
It calls your attention to the important part, right? Yeah. But overall, found it interesting, or how many of you felt like this was a bit different of a perspective than you're used to? Yeah. Because so I mean, well, not to get too far ahead of myself here, but that's something I really appreciated about it. Is it I guess intentionally doesn't take the conventional environmentalism line, right? And that's why I wanted to kind of bring it to you. That plus, and part of that is that it's actually gives somewhat of an encouraging message, right? And I think that very often environmentalism is framed negatively in terms of using the fear factor, the concern, and we mentioned this I think earlier in the semester that I tend to think of social, environmental, this type of issue when there's an issue, we often need some sort of outcry about it, right? And that's a good and appropriate use of activism, right, to generate some alert. But if we don't keep it in the right context, it's kind of like pain, right, within a human body. If you have some pain, it tells you, oh, you just broke your arm. This is bad. Do something about it fast, right? Let's take care of this. But if that same pain extends decades beyond when the thing was repaired, it becomes a problem. It's chronic pain, right? And that's an issue. And maybe chronic pain could tell you there's something else wrong too, but that's the deal, right? Is if it's just pain that we're focusing on, well, what about the healing part? What about the potential to prevent it, right? There's actually some positive elements of we could look to for environmentalism that may be more sustainable motivators for environmental tackling environmental issues. Okay, so wanted to talk. I mentioned ethics last time because I think that's a pretty good framework. It's kind of what all of this is touching on, and I thought it might be helpful to close the class sort of, or circle back all the way to, well, why do we care about water and wastewater treatment in developing countries? Why are we doing it? What's the motive, and how are we going to go about that? So I took a quick look for a summary of info on engineering ethics, because we discussed last time we don't have a formal class here on it. So this is from I think that's the National Society of Professional Engineers, NSPE, Code of Ethics for Engineers. And they have a big long document and everything, but here's their fundamental canons. So engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, perform services only in areas of their competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees, avoid deceptive acts, and conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. Okay, so there you go. Now you're ethical engineers. Any of that surprising? Anything you feel like is missing? Kind of not too surprising, right? Now, if we do think about it in terms of being specifically tasked with environmental engineering, it may, this may highlight some interesting stuff here, because at the holding paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, well, in environmental systems, sometimes the health of the public could potentially be in conflict with the welfare of the public. And this, particularly if we start thinking about, okay, well, we need some energy for the welfare of people, right? To allow them to live their lives. And that needs to be cheap, available energy, right? Maybe that's portable, maybe that's for vehicles, maybe that's accessible at a home, affordable. All of that goes into welfare of people. But then you start thinking, oh, well, we're probably combusting something and making some byproducts there that might be a hazard to the health, right? So that almost in itself right there, the very first one, draws a dilemma that we need to navigate, right, as environmental engineers. How do we do both and do it safely, holding both of those paramount in that sense, right? Okay, so that's one thought for you. Kind of, I just had there. The other thing we talked about as well. What about medical? I didn't really dive into kind of the social side of things, but I took a little excerpt from the Hippocratic Oath. There's some history to it. Could read on Hippocrates, famous philosopher back in the day, wrote something like this. It was translated. It was kind of rewritten a little bit over the years. It seems like translated to English eventually. And so this is kind of the sum of it. It doesn't say first do no harm, although that's kind of what we think of when we hear it or we hear about it. But it does say, let's see, where'd it go? So it talks about teaching, imparting the knowledge, sharing it. I will do no harm or injustice in whatever dietary or medical things. And it goes on. It talks about surgery type stuff, all sorts of things here in a little capsule. So if you're curious, you can take a look. But that's kind of the premise, right? Aim is to not do any harm with what we're doing here. So that's kind of the ethics on that sense. So what about environmental, right? This, in our context, should be kind of a subset of engineering ethics. But what about an environmental scientist, right? Presumably, I mean, they're not, if we make a distinction there, it's not going to be quite as tied to the same engineering principles of we're doing some sort of design intervention for the sake of people. So, like I said, the care for the environment, the care for the people, there's sometimes a dichotomy there. My perspective, my thinking is that those are always tied together. We care about the environment because we care about the people. And this is something we could certainly debate and think about. But I think that's kind of a two-way street there, where that's where the motivation comes from. Okay, so then here's where that first page of the manifesto starts making a distinction. The environment, or if you prefer, Mother Earth, these terms have been sort of anthropomorphized, meaning we've ascribed to the earth some human character. It's like Mother Earth. We even call it Mother, right? Certainly reasons for that. We look to the earth as something that provides for us. It's nurturing. We get shelter, we get food, we get all these things from earth because that's where we live, right? A lot of that makes sense. But if we start treating this object, the environment or whatever, as a person, ethically, that brings questions to me, my mind. Okay, so for you, is it ethical to treat the environment essentially equivalent to a human in terms of what you can or cannot do to Earth, Mother Earth? I see maybe yes, nodding. Okay.
I think you could like go situational on this. Because like you wouldn't want to throw your poop on someone.
Good example.
Yeah.
So perhaps situational.
Other than that, yes.
Situational, but maybe yes, right? Okay. I mean, when you're an infant, mom's got to take care of even that, right? But what else?
Can't have people without the environment. It's the same as their perspective. We respect each other. It's kind of like situational.
So because they're so tied together that you, in that sense, you can't treat the environment. Let's say you can't abuse the environment because that would be abusing people that are living in the environment, kind of thing, right? Because that connection. So yes. Okay. What other thoughts? And remember, you're welcome to share controversial things just for the fun of it, or just to learn from it, or anything. It doesn't have to be your opinion. Just putting it out there to see, what others have to say about it, what I have to say about it. Like any of that's fair game, and we're here to learn and think and have a bit of a good time with this. So feel free.
It's kind of like a tricky question because I think some people have more opportunity to be able to treat the environment closer to a human, whereas like some people it's like in Nicaragua, like the Hitler treaties, like they don't really have another option. So I don't think it's like fair to say like you have to like treat the environment like a human because like some people just can't.
Right. So it ties very much back to where does the poop emoji go, right? We need to give it a couple eyes. No, and landfills, right? It's like, okay, where are we going to dispose of things, right? And so it feels like it should be maybe, right? Especially because humans are connected. Any reasons why maybe we shouldn't, or it wouldn't be?
About pharmaceuticals. I don't know what I'm thinking about pharmaceuticals, but that's a thing.
Okay.
Like, you don't, like, we pump chemicals into our bodies, like chemo, we do the same with the environment, which we shouldn't do that. We probably should do chemo.
Well, there might be certain cases if we've contaminated the ground, maybe we pump chemicals to help clean it up, right?
So again, situational.
Yeah.
I think that if you treat the environment like a human in all cases, then you would end up not treating humans like a human. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you went to a developed country that's trying to use a little pollution to like improve the like living experience, what's that called?
There you go.
Then like maybe they should be able to do that because we did it like America. So
Right.
Then I've noticed is like every society that's like a first world country at a time period where they had used the environment, and for us to tell other countries that they can't do that for a period is like kind of unethical.
Yeah.
And they'll never achieve like first world status.
Almost like there's more of a balance issue.
Balance issue compared to what?
Well, the environment things, I feel like there's some corporations that would see a open forest and try to take it to expand their businesses or expand more population and stuff, but some that might not be necessary all the time.
Say that again, a little louder. Sorry.
Some that's not all necessary. Like,
Okay.
Population growing and the scores.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because when you say the treat environment people is I'm like, because we don't treat each other. I'm not sure what you.
Yeah. So treating might be a little bit of the wrong word, right? Because humans do treat each other improperly sometimes. But in holding the same ethical standards is kind of what I was trying to mean. Because certainly people treat other people unethically, which is why we have codes of ethics and things to say, hey, you're in big trouble if you don't, we go back to Hippocratic Oath or the Code for Engineers. If somebody's not holding paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, and they build a bridge that collapses because they wanted to do it cheap and they got a lot of money for it, that's a big problem, right? So we do everything we can to prevent people from doing that because people are going to be people, right? So that maybe that's not the right exact way to say it, but I guess my question is, should we try to treat the environment with the same ethical lens as we treat people? And I like what Ruth had to say about it. Can we even treat people ethically if we're going to hold that standard for the environment? And that ties into that kind of developing world. Well, if we just start today, we have a history of having used a lot of the environment, and now we're blaming somebody for doing the same. Now how is that? How does the ethics work there? Any other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, I tend to think that I don't think it's ethical to hold the environment to the same threshold as humans. So long as but having said that, we have to recognize that the environment impacts humans, right? So where do you put your excrement or your landfills? Well, there's something very important to say. People, we shouldn't place that in somebody's yard, right? Even on the neighborhood scale, you walk your dog and it poops. Well, the proper thing to do would be to clean it up, right? So that's not in somebody else's yard, making it less pleasant or unsafe, right? Same thing with a landfill, things like that. So and we can get into property rights and all of that. But the deal is that since the environment impacts humans, we have to be careful, but the environment itself, if we were to treat it like with the same ethical sense as humans, well, we can't even dig a ditch, right? Because we are tearing up that environment, right? There is a one religion, and I'm forgetting the name right now, where they're so concerned about animal life in general that they're very careful to try not to even step on an ant, right? And that to me, and that kind of goes to the next one, but if we're going to treat the environment that way, how then can we care for the welfare of people, right? So there's a tension there for sure, but it seems to me like it's probably not proper to think that we can treat the environment, Mother Earth, with that sacredness or that don't harm it at all. Rather, let's not harm people as we utilize the environment. And on another note here, as we transition to what about animals, what do we expect of animals, right? Do we get the ants in trouble for building their ant piles in our yard? We don't like that, or for squirrels for making nests in our attic, or chewing up our electrical stuff, or whatever, causing problems in us, our things, or do we fuss at animals for predating on some other species that's in danger of going extinct, right? We don't, because animals are going to be animals, right? So as humans, we're in a little, looking at the environment, we have a bit of a different situation, because of course animals don't have the same consciousness and thought that to preserve the environment in that way. We actually expect their populations to go up and down based on predator-prey cycles. Okay, so what about animals? And we can think of PETA, and I suppose some religions treating animals as if we should never even touch or harm them, right? So what do you think on this one?
I cannot stand them. I think their ad campaigns are awful. I agree with the mom, we should do cosmetic testing on animals. So I think that's unethical. But using lab rats, to find medicines and do all these clinical trials, I think it's fine. And I don't think it's ethical to treat animals like this.
Okay. Yeah.
All I say is that we have to keep animals from killing themselves.
You have to keep animals from killing themselves?
Like
Pandas.
Yeah. There's some problems that we have to live with, and put them in different habitats and force them to kind of breed so they can go extinct. So I don't think we can treat animals on our equipment.
Right. So that's a very different scenario there. We would never do that for humans, right?
I think it's similar to the environment where you treat animals like humans, you start to hospitals. There's a lot of things that are necessary to be treated those animals. And even animals people vegans sometimes when their dog a vegan diet, and then putting them on their dog.
Then their dog dies because gets sick. Yeah. So in both of these, we sort of risk harm to humans if we take that approach, or in that case, harm to other animals.
I think it needs to be a balanced thing, similar to the whole environment.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go kill a dog, but I will try to kill a wasp. I'm not going to do that. That's not going to hurt me.
Right. And there's definitely something about if you see an animal, especially a pet or something that has a higher order thinking than an ant or a wasp, but I mean, perhaps even those, if you see somebody just malevolently tormenting the animal, there's something feels very wrong about that. I'm not sure exactly how to describe that. Maybe it's just that we see a little closer inside that person and we know that's something there's something wrong there. Maybe that's what I'm reacting to, but there's something wrong there. And something that as a society we kind of generally know is not acceptable, right? So there's definitely something there, and to the extent it could harm somebody else. But we probably don't say that there is some right amount of mosquitoes or bats or ants in the world. We probably all feel like, be respectful for the religion. Is it Taoism? Can't remember exactly. Perhaps they feel like we should never harm anything, but most people would probably say, it's not a terrible thing if one ant pile in your yard was exterminated. That's kind of routine, and that stuff happens. And I like the example also of laboratory animals using animals, and this, of course, is, if I could spell and talk at the same time. I'll just leave it as lab. There we go. Example of using animals in a laboratory setting so that we can learn about how to save human lives or improve human lives. There's definitely something important there, and if we can do that and save people's lives, it's probably not ethical to hold animals to the same level as humans in that scenario, right? And that's probably contentious to anybody who does appreciate PETA's mission and things like that. Well, I like to generally think of PETA as people who eat tasty animals. You know, that's my version. But yeah, to each their own, I suppose, right? Okay, so jokes aside, though, I'm in agreement. It seems like there's something for sure there that we want to be good, want to treat animals well to the extent that we can, but to the extent that they're bringing harm or something like that, it's, you know, kind of how we treat the environment. You know, if we have to get rid of something, we have to get rid of something in order to protect human welfare, but we should not be doing so carelessly, right? There's some stewardship aspect here that we know that they are important, right? And they might be important to other people. They might be important in an ecosystem, and those are things that we care about. We have motives to care about, and in a kind of let's say more removed sense, there's a lot of people that really appreciate wildlife and would like to have the opportunity to go and see wildlife in nature, things like that. So we have this sense of caring for them and the environment in general, ecosystems, but perhaps taking too much of an anthropomorphized view of it all could get us to an unethical situation, right? How we're engaging this. You can also see this in our the development of the National Pollutant Elimination Discharge System, NPDES, for wastewater discharge. At first, they were saying the goal was to fully eliminate all discharges of wastewater, or all waste within water discharges. Quickly realized that's not tenable and, you know, in some way unethical. It's never going to happen. So the goal ended up becoming to reduce or eliminate to the extent possible, specifically to the point where it would preserve the intended uses of the receiving waters, right? So if we can protect everything we'd want to use a river for that could naturally be used for, that's the level of treatment we're going to aim for, is to make sure that's still all possible. And that actually does pretty well to protect the environment and the animals there, despite the fact that we are negatively impacting it, or we could say that we're negatively impacting it. So long as all those pieces are protected, you know, perhaps that's the appropriate threshold where it's okay to do that harm, right? Landfills are another, you know, just thinking about the environment in general, it's probably a good way to think about some of this, because it's kind of necessary if we're going to consume things and have waste. Otherwise, it's going to go in your yard or something. And actually, that's something we see in developing countries quite a lot. You don't have a place to dispose of things. It just, plastics and things just accumulate. So, okay, now we have to set aside some space for that. This becomes a bit more of an issue if you have large space restrictions, right? So in a lot of European countries, they do much more incineration of their trash, and they are much more active about trying to reduce wastes like that, because land is more scarce given the population distributions in general. So that's something that to think about. Do we have space for this, where it's, you know, kind of a small amount of harm? Okay, so let's talk about the manifesto, and some of these we've already started talking about. Okay, last time we brought up these two ideals. Sorry for the typo. Can no longer be reconciled, meaning the harmonization with nature. Let's see. I'll just bring it up to summarize it properly. So humanity must shrink its impact on the environment and must harmonize with nature. Okay, so there's two ideals. We'll say shrink environmental impact and harmonize with nature. Any extra thoughts on that? Right. Right.
I think even if we did harmonize with nature, that would mean like we're now one of like the predators competing with everything else. And like we're probably gonna outcompete every single predator. But also like if you think of it like nature works in cycles, populations like increase and decrease based off the environment. So if we had like a bad year for corn, then like a third of our population would die. Like that's how it would be if we were harmonized with nature.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're kind of too technologically advanced.
Yeah.
To be at that level anymore.
There's almost an element of technology needs to not exist for harmony, right? Or something. Like is that what's the unharmonious or something? Good thoughts there. How many of you have ever seen the YouTube channel Primitive Technology? Anybody? It's very relaxing. It's the nature noises. Yeah, the boy making the stuff. No, it's actually quite a good. Well, so if you ever need something just to relax and just be, kind of a little bit of entertainment, just whatever, learning how to start fires from without technology, right? This guy just makes random cool stuff, huts and things. Basically, was starting with no technology, and so he's at the point where he's like trying to gather iron-reducing bacteria and smelting that into little iron pellets to try to make a tool. So he's developing technology, but he's doing it from zero, right? Well, with book knowledge, of course. And so, but they're always like nature noises only with captions to explain what he's doing, no talking, and just like if you ever have the interest, check that out, because it kind of makes you think of this, because it's like you're starting, like, what would it be like to try to harmonize with nature? Well, okay, you need some shelter. Unless you find a cave, you're going to be starting to develop some technology so that you can build a hut, right? So immediately, the first thing you're doing is developing some sort of technology. Okay, now you need to cook something so you can eat something. Well, you need a fire, right? It's like, how can you even be a human without technology? It would be very hard to conceive of that, without that element. And I really like that point. I think it does. It feels to me like technology is that thing that kind of prevents harmonization, or harmonization would say you can't have technology.
See, like in my mind, when I thought about it, I'm like, harmony with nature is like, I could go on a farm, raise cows, give to them, they give to us, you die, decompose in the earth. And I was like, it's just the cycle that we're a part of. So in my mind, it's like we already kind of are harmonizing on different levels.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good point. It's not. There are many ways it's good to harmonize with nature, right? And many ways we are. So that's not quite the point. But the sentiment that we should be more primitive, or that we need to return to a primitive way of being, would actually destroy a lot of the environment, given how many people we have. Or it would say we would be heading towards vastly reducing populations, which is generally called genocide or something similar, right? That's not such a good plan. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, I think there's some in our modern environmentalism and kind of the history of environmentalism. There's a bit of a romanticism with that primitive type of lifestyle, and that's something we can see that we appreciate about the ability to live off nature and the connection. I think there is something very valuable about connecting with what makes your life go, what you're eating, how you're going about your life, and there's something very dignifying about digging a row to plant crops and grow them and eat them yourself, right? So some of us went and harvested some turmeric, and it was, maybe a little boring by the end of the day, but it was very interesting to just sit there and say, oh, here's how we're producing the stuff that we're going to consume, right? And it's like there's something grounding, to use a pun maybe intended there, about that. It's just something valuable there, but that's not perhaps the thing we should prescribe to the world, right? Okay, and that actually ties in with the intensification stuff. So I asked you this at first, but did you find it startling to see some of this was painting environmental stuff in a good or positive light? I mean, obviously there was identifying problems too. Kind of already talked about this. I think sometimes that the hey, look at the problem, that tends to be the lens we see environmentalism quite often, right? So hopefully that was refreshing. Okay, so about intensification. What do you think? Do you agree with that's what's needed? Disagree? It's okay to disagree too. What's that? So they're basically saying what the goal, what we need to do is intensify our processes so that we're making less environmental impact. So if we can grow more crops on less area, for example, that's what we ought to be doing. If we can get more energy, taking less, by using less land or less material, that's what we ought to be doing.
I do agree with that. Like, I like the idea of using less resources if that's possible. But then how worrying that is like CO2 emissions could be increased from, I don't know, like increasing something else. So like, I think it just, again, needs to be a balance. But I think the goal to decrease the resources we use is perfect.
Yeah. So as a general concept, it's good, but there may be cases for concern. If you're intensifying, let's say, animal feeding operations, concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, there are some concerns for just your environmental impact there if you're not treating your waste well or whatever. Concern for the animals, in a few senses, coming back to the idea that we ought to treat animals well. Perhaps we're giving these animals conditions of lifelong suffering and then they are slaughtered, right? And perhaps that's not what we ought to be doing. Also, the actual health and well-being of those animals and the health that we could get from eating those animals may also be impacted if we're just feeding them grain when they ought to be fed grass, right? Or ought to be able to graze. So there's actually some ways that kind of stuff could end up impacting human health and well-being because we've intensified it so much and we didn't notice some things there or we neglected some things there. So certainly I think there are cases for concern, but overall that aim of minimizing our environmental impact makes sense, right? Okay, some part of the manifesto here was talking about kind of population size and the amount of impact. Any thoughts on that discussion about population of the world? Harmonization might say we should only have 100,000 people across the world, right? could be where that thought process goes.
That was interesting to read how, like, so many years ago million people killed off, like in North America or something, so many people killed off all of these animal species, like mammoths or something.
Yeah.
That was interesting to read about.
Yeah.
I think this is the first thing that I've read that predicts like a population decline, non-catastrophic risk of all of that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's going to be not global warming that's going to be an issue. It's going to be population increase and lack of resources. So they seem to think that that's not an issue.
Yeah, what we see from population growth rates, especially, are set up for a growing population. Suddenly, they're now kind of on a stagnant or decline, and so at least the welfare systems in place, Social Security type stuff, right? Those are going to be quite challenged, and will put a strain on a lot of nations and their social support networks, structure, or programs. Because what we do see is once we have developed countries with all of our fertility control and all of that, they tend to decline. That's something that immigration can somewhat help with, but as hopefully most of the world is able to develop further and further, making less environmental impact and being less impoverished, we expect that to actually happen in all over the world. So it is definitely something that we to my knowledge, the population bomb, it was just one of the scaremongering type of things that, well, it was, I guess, understandably a concern, but I think in the end of the day, it's not going to be that, as to the best of my knowledge, right? Could be wrong, but we're still making an impact, and so there's the question there, right? But yeah, highlighting how much of an impact even a few people had with the mammoths and things is.
I know we're a little bit more green than we used to be, so it's different.
Yeah.
But just relative to millions of years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was something that I wasn't quite sure about when I was saying that like a person now has much less of an impact on a person so many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It just like maybe it's true, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it feels like something that wouldn't be there.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a kind of a question about that per person impact. So what would it take to, I guess one thing to think about is how many people lived in, let's say, England in the 1700s, and how much fuel did it take to keep them warm and energy. And thinking about that, we know that they deforested everything in England, basically for fuel, materials, all that. And so then they were using quite a lot of coal. If you fast forward, and now we can, let's just say we transition from there to, and actually this is my very next example, burning the wood to burning gas that's extracted from the ground. Now, obviously, there's reasons we may be concerned about both of them, but if we look at the difference there, per person, it probably takes much less material to use gas to meet the heating and energy needs for one person. So I think that's kind of where they're going, and technology scaling those things, right? That's the big difference there.
So with that, it's like, I do agree with that, like using gas would use less or whatever, but then it's how much more are we using now than what we used to use. But now we're cooking on the gas stove 3 times a day,
So we certainly might also use more, right? That is definitely another dynamic of it. So, and that's a very important thing to understand, right? It's like if you make more roadways for traffic, it tends to end up filling those roadways, kind of thing. But in terms of usage, is higher usage inherently a problem? Okay, it kind of depends, but your impression there is almost that it is, right? It feels like the default is.
Yeah.
And so it might equal out, but there's an important question there, I think, is, well, first of all, let me just say higher usage. It's kind of this question. But my question to you is that inherently bad? There's a notion with the, I think with the history of trying to aim towards that harmony with nature and the concern over the population expansion problem, I think there's an inherent, like, consumption stuff is inherently bad. Like, more consumption is inherently bad. And that's, I think, worth questioning, because maybe it is in most cases, but maybe it's not just inherently. Maybe there's a lot of reasons it could be bad, but perhaps it's not inherently bad in and of itself. Right? If you decide you would like to eat 3 muffins instead of 2, and you have a farm big enough, and you grow enough wheat and everything, and I don't know if you're weird and like blueberries or something, you grow enough of those and you consume more, is that inherently bad? You took more from the environment. There's a question there, right? And it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, don't eat those 3 muffins, you should only eat 2, right? That when I say it like that, it sounds so stupid, right? Like, who are you to tell me how many muffins I can eat, right? Or whatever. But it might be worth thinking more on that, because that's kind of what we're doing if we're making the argument that, oh, but now they're just going to use more, ... That is implying that therefore that's bad, and maybe we shouldn't do that, or something, right? There are certainly things to balance with any of these impacts, right? But that core tenet of environmentalism, that consumption is inherently bad, feels a little bit religious to me, right? Like that's one of the tenets, where I would rather say, well, let's make sure we're balancing things and paying the true costs and accounting for the impact and protecting from the impact, but I don't care if you have 3 muffins, right? That's injecting my opinion there. Okay, so here's a quote that I highlighted, or I brought over. Humans are as likely to spare nature because it is not needed to meet their needs as they are to spare it for explicit aesthetic and spiritual reasons. Okay, so humans are as likely to protect in the environment because they don't need to bother it as they are to protect it for beauty or spirituality. Okay, that's the claim they're making there. Do you agree with that? Does that sound right? No? Maybe not? What do you think?
Everyone's like trying to go green now, so they know they don't need to use everything.
Right, so everybody's trying to go green, right? Now, so would you say that's aesthetic and spiritual? That's kind of like the...
And that's because, I'm thinking that's because they don't need it. And then people also will try to not hurt the environment because it's good. Like, you don't want to go litter up Yellowstone.
Right.
You know?
But the phrase "go green," that's like it's an imperative, right? Saying go green, change something or do something, right? Be this way. Feel that's how it feels to me. Yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? It's like a mantra. Okay, you're saying these are because it's not so, like, are you categorizing these as one or the other, or are you?
I'm thinking if that's more like you don't need to use it. Like, people nowadays are using these more sustainable options just because they're there. Like, they used to not, like reusable rags instead of big towels or something. Like,
right.
So you're reducing. But
Gotcha.
then also, like, you don't want to go, oh, you're trashing Yellowstone. That's all I can think of.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So it's kind of both in a way. Like,
But
like, I mean, I know I have a Stanley, but I only have a Stanley. Like, I don't have every, like, because there's like 50 brands of these water bottles. And so people are like, oh, like, I use reusable water bottle, which, like, kind of like talking about this in sustainability, like, how many times you have to use your reusable water bottle for it to be better than a disposable water bottle. It's like a pretty small amount of plastic.
Right.
So it's like if you have like, because there are people who go crazy for like, they'll buy like 50 Stanleys and they have like a Stanley cabinet, and then it's like you're not doing anything at that point. You're like, you might as well just like switch to plastic water bottles. So I don't know.
There are those
I think
people.
like I think like when people do it for like aesthetic reasons, sometimes it just like is worse.
I mean, I think as long as like they're educated about it, because like that's a big thing. Like, because people don't know that if you buy like multiple Stanleys, you're actually making more like a negative impact than doing better than they think they're helpful.
Right.
So it's all about like just being educated about it.
Yeah.
What I like when people, sorry, this like keeps me like up at night. People who get like a Stanley and then they pour a disposable water bottle into it. Water filter and I'm like, use the sink. I've never seen that before. That's ridiculous.
They put like two
They're
water
like
bottles.
TikToks, they make my water with flavored orange
Yeah.
juice. It's not fair.
So I didn't have these people in mind when I was talking.
No, I mean that's a great illustration though of like kind of what a couple things happening here, right? There are people that get very motivated by the drive to make a difference or to at least be seen to be making a difference, right? And so they invest themselves in these products or whatever. There's an issue with that tangibly, practically, but I guess they have enough resources to invest themselves in that way, and so they're happy to. And I think that, you know, I really like where you guys have taken the discussion. It wasn't quite the direction I was thinking about, because I was thinking more so like the fact that it's cheap to do so, or that it's affordable to do so, is just as important as that motivation there, right? Which you kind of did touch on, because, you know, how many of us would, let's say, let's imagine that there's like a super efficient, low energy, low cost, fast train system, you know, like the super bullet train types that would take you to other cities around in the country. If that was competitive with, you know, airplane tickets and better for the environment, we'd all be doing it, right? There'd be no question, right? So some of it just is that availability. Who wants to guess how old this is? I never had it in my mind to like try to be nice and sustainable about it or whatever. You can almost see, let's see, maybe, I don't know if there's any of the logo left anymore.
3 years.
Okay, 3 years, 6 years. What else?
It was like more than 6 years. I was kind of be a little grossed out.
What's that?
If it was more than 6 years.
You'd be grossed out or what? Okay. Why grossed out? Do you think it's like degrading? I do clean it sometimes.
I believe so. Just like, it's time for a new.
But it's special. Okay.
Two professionals for water
By this point, yeah. It's outlasted several things in my life. Any other guesses?
I think it's
Closer to 10? Okay. Anything else?
How old is water
I'm starting to feel very old, actually. I got it when I was a junior in college on an internship, and the fact that you're like gawking, yeah, I guess that has been a long time. So this was 2008. Oh, 08, yep.
Wait,
So-
yeah, I was just saying, good job. You deserve a new one.
So it used to have an REI logo on it and like little mountains in the background, and like actually if you find the right spot and the right lighting, you can kind of see the Nalgene logo. Yeah. But it
2008.
yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. No, yeah.
It's sustainable.
So accidentally. It's kind of funny because I never went out on my way to do that, but over the years I've just been like, oh yeah, this has traveled with me every time I've gone to a different country. You know, it's like, oh, it's been here, it's been there, it's, you know, basically, yeah. So quite the water bottle. It will be kind of sad whenever it kicks the can. So can recommend, and who knows how much, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing health-wise or whatever. But surely anything that's leached out has done so by now. So pretty safe now, I suppose. Okay. All right. So one of the little excerpts here commented, and this might be a good spot for debate. So there's kind of the need for energy consumption. So they are highlighting that and says, climate change and other global ecological challenges are not the most important immediate concerns for the majority of the world's people, nor should they be. A new coal-fired power station in Bangladesh may bring air pollution and rising carbon dioxide emissions, but will also save lives. For millions without light and forced to burn dung to cook their food, electricity and modern fuels, no matter the source, offer a pathway to a better life, even as they bring new environmental challenges. So, what do you think about that? Feels unacceptable from the conventional lens of environmentalism, right? Or the stereotypical perspective. At least to even venture to say, nor should they be, right? That seems taboo, kind of.
I feel like we kind of touched on this earlier, like the developing countries need the chance to have a better life, or countries that are developed, like America or China, they need that so they can stop.
Right. Giving an equal opportunity for people to make use of the environment and to grow through that, and ultimately we hope that would also allow them to develop and use cleaner fuels, right? That's sort of the path we've taken. Hopefully we can speed that up, and technology can make that a faster process and less harmful process. But yeah.
I think like if they could give like multiple options, like we learned about in global issues a few different countries that chose to develop like sustainably, and they look awesome. But so I don't know, like if you could have like a better option that's still like affordable, or like would still like make sense, the way that doing this would make sense, I think that would be good. But if you can't do that, then you can't really tell them not to do it.
Yeah, so ideally we'd find or have clean options, right? Clean, but also affordable. Affordable? So that's something that if we can find a way to do that, that's definitely a big priority, right? You know, if we could avoid coal and the hazards there also harm people, that's ideal, but certainly coal would be better than, burning feces, indoor cook stoves and all that. Yeah. So probably what we could all agree on, and I really liked what they highlighted here, was kind of that aim of decoupling environmental impacts from economic outputs. Something maybe we don't think about very often. So we almost always assume they're tied together, right? But if we can have economic outputs, meaning people having wealth and prosperity and all of that, all that goes with that, disconnected from what's happening to the environment, that's kind of ideal, right? So I think all of this really forces us to think with nuance and not just lump everything in one category or the other. Wherever you happen to agree with in some political perspective or whatever, if we can stop and say, well, let's tackle real issues, let's think about them carefully, let's approach them. This type of thinking, I really like this way of thinking about it, right? Can we have economic outputs and separate that from the environmental impact? So one example I'll bring up here is cows. So we talked a little bit about them earlier in terms of concentrated feeding operations. Cows get a bit of a bad rap these days, and there's a lot of media and things about, trying to discourage red meat and concern over the methane emissions and the amount of water to feed them, all the crops they're going to consume, all of that. But if we stop and think about it for a moment, there's actually some cases where livestock are a very, very environmentally friendly option. And if we're not careful, we just throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Because there are scenarios where pasture lands could not be used for anything else, but having cows there, let's say it's a rather arid area, you can't really grow too many crops without, using way too much groundwater or something like that. Maybe cows can graze, come have a watering hole, and they're actually bringing some moisture out into the pasture and providing the ecosystem a sustained carbon sink in doing their cow thing and producing good quality food, whether that's milk or meat. Also, if you think about environments where you have too many hills to do any terraced agriculture cropping, and that could just be pasture land over there, maybe not cows, maybe goats, maybe either, whatever. Areas like that where you can do grass-fed cattle, you're not tilling the soil, which releases a bunch of CO2 and degrades the soil quality. You're doing kind of the opposite if you're doing like pasture-raised cattle. So there's certainly scenarios to consider where maybe raising cows is a lot less of an environmental harm, especially for the amount of nutrient you get from it compared to tilling and cropping land, right? So there's, certainly some concerns, but if we stop and think about what we're really trying to optimize for, this might be one of those good ways to decouple that environmental impact, because, cows raised on a pasture, you still keep that pasture and a lot of wildlife that could be there, because they're kind of doing the mowing the lawn for you. They're replenishing the area with nutrients. It's, you'll fence it off, and then you'll have probably some other wildlife around nearby, and you're not having a situation where you're spraying pesticides and things like that. So it's actually like good potential for that decoupling and for, in some ways intensifying, although that's not a huge intensification to do pasture instead of the concentrated operations. But yeah, so lots of dichotomies there, lots of balance, we'll say. Any other examples you can think of decoupling, or have you ever thought of it that way? I've read this before, but that struck out to me this time, going through it again. Okay. Anything else you find interesting, helpful, annoying, frustrating, disagree with? What do you think? Is this useful? Do you feel like reflecting on this after most of the class, do you feel like that, perspective shifted at all, or is that kind of just same type of stuff we were talking about at the beginning? What do you think?
I think it just kind of like solidifies my decision to be an environmental engineer. Like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a good challenge, right? To balance these impacts here. Okay, couple quick announcements. I started working on grading your drafts. I will have them back to you by the end of the weekend, is my aim. That's kind of my homework for you. So you'll have those for at least a week. I have a comment on those, but before I go there, another thing to keep in mind is we have course evaluations. I'd really like your feedback. Those are completely anonymous, and since this is a communications intensive course, you'll have a special feedback thing you can do for that, and the CI people would like that, and I would like that if you would just take the extra minute to do that as well. I think it's just because this is communications intensive, how did that go or whatever. But regardless, I would love your feedback. I might get like in-person feedback as well, just for what you thought of the course, the integration of the Nicaragua trip, or just the stories from the trip, that kind of stuff. Would love to hear how you felt about this. So it's the first time for me doing this, so thank you all for that. Okay, so next time will be a couple presentations, and then I'll also have some sort of a few practice exam problems, get you oriented with the type of questions I'm planning to ask for that. And Thursday next week we'll be kind of going over that and one more presentation. Okay, so one note on the draft so far. I just wanted to remind everybody that if you're going to quote a section of text from one of your sources, you must use the quotations, right? You must have a proper block quotation or quotation marks, because if you're copying and pasting, even if you're adding the citation there, if it's verbatim, that's plagiarism, right? So definitely don't do that. Make sure that you are rephrasing it using your own words to say what you want. And if you really find a sentence that you just can't say it in a better way, and it's just really, really nice to say it the way they said it, you say, maybe you describe, and so described it this way, and you quote, right? So that's the right way to do that. Whereas if you block paste, even if you're adding the citation, that's not appropriate. Okay. All right. So with that, you should see those posted for you the next few days, and have a good weekend.